The wind cut through the barren land like a blade, carrying snow and shards of ice across the empty plains. Ethan walked alone, his boots crunching into the frozen ground with each heavy step. The alien planet was silent except for the sound of the wind, but the silence felt wrong, like it was hiding something. His breath came out in small clouds, fading quickly in the freezing air. The temperature had dropped fast when the twin suns disappeared behind the jagged mountains. Now, the world was wrapped in darkness and biting cold. He needed to find a place to rest before the frost claimed him. The scanner on his wrist blinked faintly, showing no signs of shelter for miles. Still, he kept moving, scanning the horizon for anything an outcrop, a cave, even a wreck. At last, he spotted a small dip in the land where the wind seemed weaker. He descended into the shallow hollow and began setting up a small camp. His portable heater buzzed faintly, barely enough to keep him alive through the night. Ethan pulled his sleeping bag from his pack, shook off the ice, and unrolled it close to the fire pit he'd dug. The flickering light from his fire cast shadows across the icy walls of the hollow. He felt the heat soak into his hands as he held them close to the flames. That was when he heard a sound almost too soft to notice. Footsteps, light but deliberate, crunching over the frost just beyond the reach of the firelight. Ethan's hand went to the sidearm at his hip. His eyes narrowing, he turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, small and fragile, moving with the uncertainty of someone half frozen. It was a girl, or at least, she looked like one, though her features were not human. Her skin had a faint shimmer, pale with a bluish tint, and her hair was silver, tangled and dusted with frost. Her eyes were large and luminous, reflecting the fire like twin moons. She was dressed in little more than torn fabric, wrapped loosely around her thin body. Her bare feet were cracked from the cold, each step leaving a faint trace of red on the snow. Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon, unsure whether she was a trap or a genuine victim. The wastelands were known for bandits who used wounded or lost wanderers to lure in prey. But when she stumbled closer, he could see her trembling violently. She stopped just outside the warmth of the fire, hugging herself tightly. Her voice came out broken and weak. "Please." Just warmth. The words were simple, halting, her accent heavy but clear enough. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his breath steady, his thoughts conflicted. Giving her shelter could mean risking his life, but turning her away would almost certainly mean she'd die tonight. The cold was no respecter of species. It killed without mercy. After a long silence, he sighed and pulled his sleeping bag from the ground. "Here," he said, tossing it toward her. "Use it." She looked at it as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her hands reached out slowly, hesitant, as though afraid it might vanish if she moved too quickly. She clutched it to her chest, her fingers brushing the worn fabric. Ethan watched as she crawled into it, curling up like a frightened animal. He turned back to the fire, adding more fuel to keep it alive. The warmth from the flames barely touched him now without the bag. He felt the cold creeping into his bones, but he forced himself to ignore it. Behind him, the girl shifted slightly, her luminous eyes watching him from the safety of the sleeping bag. She seemed unsure whether to trust him, yet unwilling to look away. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You?" "Not from here, no," Ethan replied, "just passing through." She nodded slowly, as though this explained something. Outside the hollow, the wind grew stronger, howling like a living thing. Ethan glanced at the girl again, noticing her lips were still pale, despite the sleeping bag. He wondered how long she had been out here before finding him. Her gaze flickered to the edge of the camp, scanning the darkness like she was expecting something. "What are you looking for?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Night comes with hunters." Ethan's jaw tightened, his instincts telling him this was more than just superstition. He had heard stories in the outpost creatures that hunted heat in the freezing dark. He checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. The girl sank deeper into the sleeping bag, her eyes darting toward the shadows again. The fire crackled softly, but now it felt like a small, fragile barrier against whatever was out there. Ethan kept his gaze on the darkness. Every muscle tense. The cold was bad enough, but now he realized the night might hold dangers far worse. Then frost, somewhere in the distance, too far to see, but close enough to feel. Something let out a low, chilling howl. The sound carried through the wind. Curling around them like a warning, the girl's breathing quickened. And she gripped the sleeping bag tighter. Ethan shifted closer to the fire. His eyes never leaving the black horizon. It was going to be a long night. The wind outside the hollow roared like an angry beast, shaking loose flakes of snow that drifted down from the ridges above. Ethan sat close to the fire, rubbing his hands together, trying to chase away the cold sinking deeper into his bones without the sleeping bag. The heat from the flames was all he had, but even that felt weak against the biting air behind him. Lyra, he had learned her name only moments ago, curled inside the sleeping bag, her head peeking out just enough for him to see the glow of her eyes. She was watching him, silent, still, almost like a small animal, afraid to make the wrong move. Ethan wondered if she was going to run the moment he let his guard down. It wouldn't be the first time someone had taken advantage of a stranger's kindness out here, but something told him she wasn't lying when she said she needed warmth. Her voice had cracked with every word, and her hands had trembled not only from cold but from exhaustion. He could tell she hadn't eaten in days. Maybe longer. "You were following me," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Her eyes shifted. And for a moment, he thought she might deny it. Instead, she nodded slowly. "From far," she admitted, her words broken, but clear. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "You. Fire safe." Ethan studied her face, wondering what kind of life she had come from if a stranger's campfire felt safe. The fire crackled, sending a small wave of warmth across his legs. But it was short-lived, as another sound drifted in from beyond the hollow soft at first. Then rising, it wasn't the wind this time. It was the same haunting howl from earlier. Only closer. Lyra's head jerked toward the noise, and Ethan saw fear flash in her eyes. "They are coming," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Who?" Ethan asked, already checking his rifle. "Night Reapers," she breathed. "They smell warmth." "They find us." Ethan's grip tightened on the weapon. The Night Reapers were a story he'd heard in outposts. Hunters of the dark that could sense heat and movement through walls of snow and ice. Many believed they were just a myth, a way to scare travelers into staying inside during the worst nights, but the fear in Lyra's voice told him otherwise. "How many?" he asked. She shook her head. "Enough." Ethan scanned the entrance of the hollow, his eyes narrowing the fire. Was both their life and their death kept them warm, but also sent a glowing signal into the dark. "Can you run?" he asked her. She hesitated, glancing down at her thin legs under the sleeping bag. "Not far," she admitted. Ethan cursed under his breath. They couldn't stay here, but if she couldn't run, their options were limited. He thought about taking the sleeping bag back. He would be faster without carrying extra weight, but the image of her shivering in the snow kept him from saying it. "We move now," he decided. Lyra's eyes widened. "Outside." "Worse," she whispered. "Not for long," Ethan said firmly. "We find Kavriel cover." She bit her lip, clearly torn between fear of the cold and fear of what hunted them. Still, she began to pull herself out of the sleeping bag, wincing. As the air hit her skin, Ethan took the bag and slung it over his shoulder before helping her to her feet. Her steps were slow, unsteady, but determined. They moved toward the edge of the hollow. Ethan leading, rifle in hand. The howl came again, this time answered by another and another. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran through him. The shadows beyond the firelight shifted. And for a moment, he swore he saw something. Moving low to the ground, gliding over the snow without a sound. Lyra's grip on his sleeve tightened, her breath quick and uneven. "Don't look at them," she whispered. "If you see, they see you." Ethan didn't know if that was true or just superstition, but he kept his eyes forward. They stepped out into the open night. The wind slamming into them like a wall. Snowflakes stung his face, and the ground crunched loudly. Under their boots, behind them, the faint glow of the fire was swallowed by the darkness. Ethan moved quickly, guiding Lyra along a narrow path between jagged ice formations. The wind howled between the spires, masking the sound of their footsteps. But it also carried another sound-soft, padded steps moving in unison. Following them, Ethan didn't turn around. But his gut told him the Night Reapers were there. He glanced at Lyra, who was struggling to keep pace. Her breathing sharp and ragged. "We need to move faster," he urged. "I can't," she gasped. Ethan didn't hesitate. He bent down, scooped her into his arms, and kept moving. Her weight was light, too light for someone her size, as they pushed forward. Ethan could feel her heartbeat pounding against his chest. A flicker of movement appeared in his peripheral vision, but he forced himself to look straight ahead. Somewhere ahead, the land dipped again. And he prayed it would lead to shelter. The wind grew stronger, and snow swirled around them, reducing his vision to just a few meters. Still, he pressed on, knowing that stopping meant death. Then, just as his legs began to ache from the effort, he saw a narrow crack in the side of an ice wall, barely wide enough for a person to slip through without thinking. He rushed toward it, ducking inside. With Lyra still in his arms, the crack widened into a small hollow shielded from the wind. He set her down, both of them gasping for breath, outside. Faint shapes moved past the entrance, their glowing eyes scanning the snow. Ethan held his breath. His hand on his rifle, Lyra stayed still, her wide eyes locked on the shadows. Minutes passed before the shapes finally drifted away. Swallowed by the dark once more, Ethan exhaled slowly. They were safe for now. The hollow inside the ice wall was small, just enough for Ethan and Lyra to crouch without touching the cold walls. The dim blue light from outside cast strange shadows across the jagged surfaces, making the place feel alive. Ethan kept one hand on his rifle, the other steadying himself against the slippery ground. Lyra sat close to him, wrapped tightly in the sleeping bag, her breath forming faint clouds in the frigid air. Neither spoke, their ears straining for any sound that might give away the hunter's position. The wind outside roared, but beneath it, there was another sound, a faint scraping, like claws. On ice, Ethan's jaw tightened, his instincts screaming that they were still being watched. Lyra's fingers tightened on his sleeve, a silent warning, "They don't leave." She whispered so quietly it was almost lost in the wind. "They wait." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding that the creatures outside were patient. Patience was often deadlier than speed in a predator. The scraping sound faded, replaced by silence. But Ethan didn't relax. He knew silence could be a trap. The cold was starting to seep through his gloves, making his fingers stiff. His body ached from carrying Lyra earlier, but he kept his focus on the entrance. A faint flicker of movement caught his eyeshadows stretching unnaturally long across the snow. Then came the glow. Two yellow eyes, round and unblinking, appeared at the edge of the crack in the ice. They hovered there for a moment, unbothered by the wind, fixed entirely on the warmth inside. Ethan froze, holding his breath. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her gaze locked on the creature's eyes. "Don't move," she mouthed. The creature's head tilted slightly, its shape still hidden in the darkness. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The eyes moved slowly away, disappearing into the storm. But before relief could sink in, another set of eyes appeared, this time lower to the ground, then another, and another. They were surrounding the entrance. Ethan's mind raced. The flare gun, he thought. It might work. Bright light and heat might confuse them, but it would also reveal their position to anything else in the area. He glanced at Lyra, who was shaking her head before he even moved. "They are not afraid of light," she whispered, "but they follow heat." That made things worse. Firing a flare would only make them hungrier. The scraping returned. Louder this time. Ethan could hear the sound of claws digging into the ice. "They're trying to get in," he muttered under his breath. Lyra's grip on his arm tightened. He checked his rifle again, making sure it was ready. If they got through, it would be a fight in close quarters. He didn't like the odds. A sudden thump echoed through the hollow as one of the creatures slammed against the outer ice. The sound vibrated through the walls, sending small shards of frost falling from above. Ethan leaned toward the entrance, trying to gauge the distance of the attackers. Through the blizzard outside, he saw one of them, tall, thin, with long limbs ending in hooked claws. Its body was covered in jagged fur that bristled in the wind. Its face was long and narrow, and its mouth opened wider than it should, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth. It moved with an unnatural glide, like it was barely touching the ground. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He had fought many things on many worlds, but something about the way these creatures moved told him they weren't mindless beasts. They were hunting with purpose. The creature paused, its head lifting as if sniffing the air. Then it let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in Ethan's chest. Another answered from the left, then another from behind them. They were closing in from all sides. Ethan turned to Lyra. "We can't stay here," he said firmly. She looked terrified. "Where do we go?" "Anywhere they're not," he replied. "We move fast and quiet." Lyra swallowed hard, but nodded. Ethan slung the sleeping bag over his back again, motioned for her to stay right behind him. He took one deep breath, then bolted toward the entrance. The cold slammed into him like a wall, but he didn't slow. Snow blinded his eyes, forcing him to focus on shadows and movement instead of details. Lyra stayed close, her small footsteps quick and light. A shape darted from the side, lunging for them. Ethan swung his rifle up and fired, the shot echoing through the storm. The creature screeched, stumbling back, but the noise only stirred the others, their glowing eyes darting in from the dark. "Run!" Ethan barked. They tore through the snow, weaving between jagged ice formations. The creatures followed, their long limbs carrying them over the ground with terrifying speed. One of them leaped over a ridge, landing just meters ahead. Ethan fired. Again, forcing it back, Lyra grabbed his sleeve, pulling him toward a narrow gap between two ice spires. He didn't hesitate, diving through the gap, feeling the ice scrape against his shoulders. They stumbled into a hidden path, shielded from most of the wind. Behind them, the creatures howled in frustration, unable to fit through the narrow space. Ethan leaned against the wall, panting. Lyra collapsed beside him, her face pale, but her eyes still alert. You shot them," she said between breaths. "Only slowed them down." Ethan replied. "They will find another way," she warned. Ethan knew she was right. This hunt wasn't over, not by a long shot. The narrow path between the ice spires was tight, forcing Ethan and Lyra to move in single file. The wind here was softer, but the air carried an uneasy stillness. Ethan kept his rifle raised, scanning the twisting path ahead, behind them. The Night Reaper's howls echoed, bouncing off the walls like a haunting warning. Lyra's footsteps crunched softly behind him, quick but careful. "They're trying to circle us," she whispered. Ethan didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. If the creatures found another way around the ice, they could block the exit ahead, trapping them inside. The thought pushed him to move faster. The path twisted sharply to the right, opening into a wider section where the ground dipped. Ethan paused, crouching low, motioning for Lyra to stay still. He could hear faint movements ahead, something brushing against the ice, slow and deliberate. The creatures weren't chasing blindly. They were stalking. Lyra's breathing was fast, her hands gripping the edges of the sleeping bag around her shoulders. "We can't go back," she murmured, her voice trembling. "No," Ethan agreed quietly. "We move forward, but stay close." He edged forward, his boots crunching softly. On the frost, the sound of claws scraping on ice grew clearer. Ethan peeked around a jagged wall and froze. One of the creatures stood ahead. Its long limbs spread, blocking the path, its glowing eyes fixed on the narrow passage like it had been. Waiting for them, it opened its mouth slowly, revealing rows of sharp teeth. A low growl rumbling from its throat, Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. But before he could fire, another sound came from above a hollow. Echoing thump, snow rained down from the ridge above, and a second night reaper dropped silently. Onto the ice just behind them, Lyra gasped, stumbling back toward Ethan. They were trapped. Ethan turned, aiming at the one behind them, but the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed. He fired, the shot exploding in the tight space, the blast echoing like thunder. The bullet hit its shoulder, spinning it sideways with a screech. "Go," Ethan barked, pushing Lyra toward the gap past the first creature. The forward reaper lunged, claws slashing through the air. Ethan swung the rifle like a club, smashing it across the creature's jaw. It reeled back just enough for him to shove Lyra past. "Run!" He shouted again. They sprinted through the gap, the ice walls blurring past them, behind them. The enraged howls rose, joined by more voices. More of the hunters had joined the chase. The path sloped downward, and Ethan used the momentum to keep moving, his breath burning in his chest. Lyra stumbled once, nearly falling, but Ethan caught her arm and pulled her forward. Snow whipped around them, the wind picking up again as they left the shelter of the spires. They emerged into a wide open plain of ice, the surface glowing faintly under the planet's twin moons. The sight would have been beautiful if it weren't for the nightmare chasing them. Ethan scanned the horizon, no obvious shelter, just endless ice and jagged formations in the distance. "They'll catch us here," Lyra gasped, looking back. At the glowing eyes spilling out from the narrow path, Ethan's mind raced. Then he spotted a dark shape in the distance, half buried under snow. "A wreck, over there," he said, pulling her in that direction. The cold bit into his skin with every step, but adrenaline kept his legs moving. The wreck came into view, a broken shuttle, its metal frame twisted but still partly intact. The cockpit was crushed, but the side hatch hung open. They scrambled toward it, Ethan pushing Lyra inside first before climbing in after her. Inside, the air was still freezing, but at least the wind was gone. Ethan slammed the hatch shut and locked it, the metallic clang echoing through the wreck. Almost instantly, claws scraped against the outside, a horrible screeching sound that made Lyra cover her ears. "They know we're here," she said, her voice shaking. Ethan looked around the interior, his eyes scanning for anything useful. The shuttle's walls were dented, panels hanging loose, but in the corner, he spotted an emergency supply box. He yanked it open. Flares, thermal blankets, a small fuel cell. The fuel cell gave him an idea. "Help me," he said, dragging a loose panel toward the hatch. They worked quickly, setting the fuel cell behind the panel. "When they break in, this will blow," Ethan explained. "It might scare them off." "Maybe worse." Lyra's eyes widened, but she nodded, trusting him. The claws outside grew more frantic, pounding against the hatch, bending the metal inward. Ethan took a flare and lit it, tossing it out a broken side window to draw some of them away. For a moment, the scraping paused. Then, with a deafening screech, the hatch gave way. A night reaper burst through, its glowing eyes locking onto them. Ethan grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind the cockpit wall. The creature stepped forward, its claws scraping the floor. Its head tilted, sensing their heat. Then its claws hooked the panel covering the fuel cell. The weight shifted, the panel fell, and the fuel cell cracked under the pressure in the next instant. A burst of light and heat exploded in the hatchway. The Night Reaper shrieked, its body catching fire. The blast forced several others outside to retreat, their howls echoing into the night. Ethan held Lyra close, shielding her from the blast of heat when the flames faded. The wreck was silent except for the sound of the wind outside. "They'll be back," Lyra whispered, her voice small. Ethan knew she was right. This escape was only temporary. The wreck was quiet now, but it was not the safe kind of quiet. It was the kind that came after a storm, heavy and watchful, as if the world was holding its breath. Ethan sat with his back against the cold metal wall, his rifle resting across his knees. Lyra was curled in the sleeping bag again, pressed close to him for warmth. Her face was pale, her silver hair damp from melted frost, strands clinging to her cheeks. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen plain, carrying the distant echo of the Night Reaper's cries. They had not gone far. Ethan knew predators like them did not give up easily. He checked the shuttle's broken systems again, looking for anything that could help them last the night. Most of the controls were dead, the power long gone, but the emergency lights still gave a faint orange glow. It was enough to make the small space feel less like a tomb. Lyra shifted slightly, her glowing eyes watching him. She had barely spoken since they fled into the wreck. Now she seemed to be wrestling with something in her mind. Ethan noticed. Her lips moved before any sound came. "You? Why help me?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost to the wind's scream outside. Ethan met her gaze. "Because you were freezing to death," he said simply. She shook her head slowly, as if that answer wasn't enough. "Many see. They walk away," she murmured, her eyes lowering. Ethan didn't reply at first, unsure what to say. He had seen plenty of cruelty in the galaxy. But something about the way she said it felt heavier, like she had seen it too many times. She pulled the sleeping bag tighter around herself, her shoulders trembling not from cold, but from memory. "My home," she began, her voice breaking. "They came. Burned it." Ethan stayed still, letting her speak at her own pace. "Night Reapers?" he asked. She shook her head sharply. "Not them. Men, soldiers." From the Black Crest, the name made Ethan's jaw tighten. The Black Crest were known in the outer systems as raiders, who took what they wanted and left nothing behind. They didn't just raid, they erased entire communities. They killed the strong, take the young, sell the rest, Lyra whispered, her eyes far away now. Her hands gripped the sleeping bag so tightly her knuckles turned pale blue. Ethan could see the pain in her face, the kind that came from watching everything you knew vanish in flames. "They took my brother," she said, her voice trembling. "I ran until snow hid my steps. But the cold." Her words trailed off as her eyes glossed with tears. Ethan reached into the supply kit, pulling out a packet of ration bars. "Eat," he said, handing one to her. She hesitated, then took it, biting off small pieces like she wasn't sure she deserved to eat at all. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of her chewing soft against the creaks of the shuttle. Outside, the wind slowed, and the howls faded into the distance. Ethan didn't trust it. Predators sometimes waited in silence just to see if prey would relax. "You were following me because you thought I was safe," Ethan said after a long pause. Lyra nodded slowly. "You walked with no fear." "I was cold," Ethan replied. "Not fearless." That made her smile faintly. "But it didn't last. You gave me your sleeping bag, she said softly. Had nothing to give back? Ethan looked at her. You don't have to give anything back. But she shook her head firmly. I owe you my life. There was no way to convince her otherwise. He could see it in her eyes. To her, debt was not just a matter of survival. It was something sacred. Suddenly, a sharp thud hit the outside of the wreck. Ethan froze, his rifle already lifting toward the hatch. Lyra stiffened, her breathing quickening. The sound came again to claws. Scraping metal, deliberate and slow. They're still here, she whispered. Ethan moved to the small broken window, peering out into the swirling snow. A shadow passed by, tall and thin, moving just beyond the edge of sight. The creature's glowing eyes glanced toward the shuttle before disappearing again. They're testing us, Ethan murmured. He returned to his place beside Lyra, keeping the rifle ready. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. They smell fear, too. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Then they'll have to go hungry. That almost made her laugh, but instead she just looked at him for a long moment. Finally, she said, If I die tonight, I want you to know my name is Lyra Tehran. Ethan nodded. Then you won't die tonight. She smiled faintly, a real smile this time, and for the first time since he'd found her. Her body seemed to relax just a little. Outside, the scraping moved away again, the sound fading into the storm. But Ethan kept his rifle in hand because he knew this night wasn't done with them yet. A pale glow touched the broken edge of the shuttle's roof. For the first time in hours, the color of the sky began to shift from pitch black to a soft gray. Morning was near. Ethan opened one eye, feeling the tightness in his muscles from staying alert all night. He hadn't truly slept, only rested in short bursts. His rifle never far from his grip. Beside him, Lyra stirred quietly, her silver hair tangled around her face, her head rested. Lightly on his shoulder, the sleeping bag wrapped tightly around her small frame. She looked peaceful in that moment, but he knew it wouldn't last. Ethan shifted slowly, trying not to wake her. But her eyes opened anyway. She blinked a few times, then sat up, rubbing her eyes with cold fingers. Morning? She asked softly, her voice raspy. Almost, Ethan replied. His gaze focused on the light outside. Hey. They both stayed quiet, listening. The wind had settled into a whisper. And the howling cries of the night reapers had disappeared. It was too quiet. I think they left, Lyra said. But Ethan shook his head. No, he said. They're waiting? She echoed, confused. Ethan nodded. They know the cold makes people desperate. They wait until you step into the open. Lyra's face turned pale again. The brief peace vanishing from her expression. Ethan stood, slowly, stretching his arms and shoulders, then moved toward the broken window. The outside was still a frozen wasteland, stretching far in all directions, but in the distance. He spotted movement, not the smooth glide of the night reapers, but something mechanical, a blinking red light. A drone. He narrowed his eyes, tracking its slow flight. It wasn't black. Crested had the markings of a neutral rescue scout. Maybe it had picked up the flare from the night before. Ethan turned back to Lyra, a spark of hope in his voice. We might have a way out. She looked up, her eyes wide. Rescue. Maybe, he said. But we have to reach them. He checked the scanner on his wrist. Weak, but still functioning, the drone was circling a signal beacon, one of the old emergency towers, maybe a kilometer away. That's our best chance, he said, pointing at the scanner screen. Lyra followed his finger, then nodded slowly. We can go now. Ethan hesitated, then peeked through the hatch, scanning for movement. The snow was still thick, but visibility had improved. Nothing moved nearby. They're hiding, he muttered. But they're still out there. He turned to Lyra. Stick close. Don't stop, and don't look back. She nodded. pulling the sleeping bag around herself like a cloak. Ethan slung his rifle and grabbed the last flare from the emergency box. Tucking it into his jacket, they stepped out into the snow, the cold air biting instantly at their faces. The snow crunched under their boots as they moved quickly across the flat ice. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every gust of wind sounded like claws. Ethan kept his eyes on the blinking light in the sky. It was their goal, their hope, and their only chance. Lyra kept close behind him, her breath short, her legs trembling with effort. Still, she didn't complain. They passed a shattered ice wall. Then a frozen stream, the ground growing rougher. With every step, suddenly, Ethan stopped, raising a hand. Ahead. A shape crouched low in the snow, almost perfectly still, a night reaper. It hadn't seen them yet. Its head turned toward the east. Ethan signaled Lyra to crouch behind a snowbank while he moved quietly around the edge. The drone's light blinked brighter now, was descending near the signal tower. They were close, but so was the danger. The creature sniffed the air, then let out a low growl. Ethan knew time was up. He grabbed the flare and struck it against the wall of ice. Beside him, a burst of red fire lit up the plain. The creature shrieked, spinning toward him. But he was already running. Go! He shouted, waving Lyra forward. She ran past him, her legs pumping with every ounce of strength she had. The creature gave chase, but the flare's heat confused it. Making it veer to the side, more howls came from behind. Others had seen the flare. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air, then sprinted after Lyra. The signal tower was just ahead, the rescue drone now hovering low, scanning the area as they reached the tower's base. A panel slid open on the side of the drone. Ah! Mechanical voice spoke. Rescue authorized, scan for life forms. Ethan pushed Lyra forward. Go. Let it scan you. She stepped in front of the drone and it scanned her with a soft blue light. Alien juvenile status. Critical exposure, it announced. It moved toward Ethan, scanning again. Human adult status. Minor hypothermia. Transport confirmed. The drone said, evac pod arriving from the sky. Another ship began to descend, its engines humming softly. Behind them, shadows raced across the ice. The Night Reapers had returned. Furious and fast, Ethan raised his rifle again, standing between Lyra and the darkness. But this time, he didn't have to shoot. The rescue ship touched down, a ramp lowering, and 2 armored medics jumped out. Weapons raised, they opened fire on the Reapers, forcing them back. One of them grabbed Lyra and lifted her gently, carrying her into the ship. Another motioned to Ethan. Come on, let's go. He ran up the ramp as the ship lifted off, the Reapers vanishing below in the snow. Inside, warmth returned at last. Ethan collapsed beside Lyra. Both of them safe at least for now. The rescue ship soared through the sky, leaving the frozen world behind. Inside, the warmth of the cabin wrapped around Ethan and Lyra like a blanket. For the first time in days, there was no wind, no snow, no fear of glowing eyes in the dark. The silence now was soft, comforting, broken only by the hum of the engines. Ethan sat beside Lyra, watching her as she slept in the medical pod. Her breathing was steady, her face peaceful, though her skin still held the pale blue tint of exposure. He had stayed awake the entire flight so far, unwilling to rest until he knew she was truly safe. One of the medics came over quietly, checking the pod screen. She's stable now, he said. She just needs rest, food, and time. Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face. Where are we headed? He asked. Waypoint Station 12. The medic replied. Neutral territory, safe zone. Ethan exhaled slowly, finally letting some of the tension leave his body. Safe, he thought. They had made it out alive. Hours passed, and the ship finally docked. The doors opened with a soft hiss, and warm. Filtered light filled the corridor. Ethan carried Lyra in his arms, her small form light as ever. The station was quiet, clean, and filled with the soft murmur of calm voices. A staff member guided them to a private recovery room with a wide bed and soft lighting. As soon as Ethan laid her down, Lyra stirred. Her eyes fluttering open, her gaze searched for him, and when she saw him, her lips curved into a faint smile. "You stayed," she whispered. "Of course," Ethan replied, pulling a chair close. "I said I would." She reached out with one hand, and he took it gently. The warmth in her touch was no longer the cold of fear, but the comfort of trust. They remained there for a while, silent but close. Lyra's voice was quiet when she finally spoke again. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said alone. Ethan looked into her eyes. "You weren't alone anymore." She blinked slowly, her lashes wet. "I didn't understand why you helped me, because you were worth saving," he said softly. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned her face away. "No one ever said that to me before," she whispered. Ethan moved to sit beside her on the bed. "Then I'll lie." "Say it again. You're worth saving, Lyra." She looked at him with wide, shining eyes. Her voice trembled. "Even though I'm different?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Especially because of that." She sat up slowly, the sleeping bag still wrapped around her like a robe. "I want to stay with you," she said suddenly, her voice raw but strong. Ethan blinked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "I have nowhere else," she said. "But it's not just that. I feel safe when I'm near you." He gave her a small smile. "Then stay. I won't leave you behind." She reached out again, this time placing her hand on his chest, right over his heart, back in the snow. "When you gave me your sleeping bag," she said, "you didn't just save my life. You gave me a place in your world." Ethan's throat tightened, but he nodded. "And you gave me something too," he said. "A reason to keep going." Later that day, the station staff offered Ethan a room in the civilian wing. He requested one with 2 beds, and when Lyra heard, she smiled. "No more snow," she whispered as they entered their new space. "No more running," Ethan replied. She placed her few belongings, a torn cloth and a small charm made from bone, on the table. "This is all I have," she said, "but it's yours if you want it." He picked up the charm and handed it back to her. "You've already given me more than that," he said. "You gave me your trust, and I'll protect it." That night, as they lay in their separate beds, Lyra's voice reached across the room. "Ethan," she said softly. "Yes." He replied, "If one day I grow strong again, I'll fight beside you." He turned his head to look at her. "You already fought. You survived, you endured, and you stayed brave." She smiled, though he couldn't see it in the dark. "Then promise me something," she said. "Anything." He replied, "If I ever fall behind again, will you come find me?" Ethan didn't even pause. "I promise," he said. Lyra let out a soft breath, and her voice came out like a whisper in the dark. "Then I give you my heart, human." "I already gave you mine," Ethan said, closing his eyes, and in the quiet, with no snow, no claws, and no fear, 2 hearts began to heal together.